On this channel, we've been trying to understand how, as a generation, we might be interested or why so many of us have supported Luigi. In the past, we've looked at the societal impacts and how as a society we got to that point. But now I want to talk about the more personal reasons. So why? What about this made our generation personally so interested? So let's look into it. First and foremost, let's just get it out of the way. This is not an endorsement. This is not in support. It's none of that. This is really just about analyzing Gen Z, analyzing why we might, or some of us, I should say, have supported this incident. We'll say the style of this video will be a little different from my last one, which is a little bit more evidence-based and about statistics. In this one, I want to talk more about our personal reasons. Why, from individual to individual, this could be so alluring, that this story could have been so captivating. The first thing I want to talk about is an old meme, and that is the adulting meme. Now, the adulting meme has been basically around since millennials came of age. And it's like, oh, look at me, I'm doing something that's hard. I'm doing something that makes me grown up, or this is so hard to do this. It's so hard to do this normal activity. And at this point, it's become a little overdone and cringe. But why is it important to start there? Well, I think it begins this kind of evolution that that generations have gone through in modern life. And what is that evolution I'm talking about? Well, it's that the modern world, the internet, the demands that we have on us as adults make us feel like it's more difficult than it seems to be. What do I mean by that? Well, there are so many different loopholes and strictures and rules and laws and regulations and this or that we don't really think of when we're kids. When we're kids, we don't think that we're going to need to register our car with the DMV and we're going to have to renew that yearly, right? We don't think about that. We don't think about having renter's insurance. We don't think about our health insurance, for instance, which is one I'll talk about a little bit later. We don't talk about that. We don't talk about all of these different facets of modern life are things that we aren't necessarily prepared for as adults. And that's something that's fundamentally unique about our modern world. Our modern world has so many of these little things, these little mandates, we'll call them, or in order for you to do one thing, you have to do another. In order for you to buy a house, you have to have a credit score. In order for you to have an apartment, you have to have renter's insurance, and on and on and on. We don't think about those things. We haven't been taught those things. So there is this feeling among particularly Gen Z, now that we're the young adults on the scene, that we're just unprepared for being an adult. We're just not ready for this stuff. Like, it just seems so random and it's hard to understand. And oftentimes it's more difficult than it needs to be. And that brings us to something like health insurance. As someone who works in the medical field, seeing people interact, and whether that be doctors and nurses or just normal patients, seeing them interact with healthcare and with health insurance is so fascinating. Now, why is that fascinating? Because this is a perfect example of what I'm talking about when it comes to this adulting evolution, this adulting influence. What am I saying? Well, this level of complexity, this sheer level of complication that you have to go through to understand what it is to have this health insurance. You have the HMO plans and the PPO plans and Blue Cross Blue Shield and United Healthcare and this is covered, but this is out of network. It is a mind-bogglingly crazy maze to go through to try to understand what these things are. In particular, I remember there was this one patient I was dealing with, and they came in and I'm afraid they couldn't afford the medication that they were put on. So we had to help them fill out some forms to get some patient assistance because they couldn't afford it. It wasn't going to be properly filled. And so they had to go through these forms to submit it to their companies, right? Well, they go through this form and they do this. And this is before I had met them. And it comes back and it's denied. So I then meet up with them and sit down and I see that their left eye is swollen and there's a little bit of, looks like dried pus, and you can tell they cannot see through it. I mean, there's not even a slit of eye left that they could peer through, and it's just incredibly inflamed, discolored. I can go on and on, but I'll try to keep it as less disgusting as possible. But it was just a sight to behold, and something that would make you very, very sad to think about. And I couldn't even imagine being them. But I see them first with this eye. Turns out they have eye cancer. And part of the reason, and I believe part of the reason why they couldn't afford this, was because they were out of work because of their eye cancer. And they were getting this actively treated, they were going to chemotherapy, and this was this long struggle. Well, I sit down with them to fill this stuff out. We fill it out together. They take their part home so that way they can add some more documents. Well, they come back, bring it back, and we submit it to the company once more. Well, then again, the form comes back to us saying it will not be approved. And this time, why won't it be approved? It wasn't because we missed information. It wasn't because she couldn't see, because she was still peering out of the one eye, right? And then she just missed some random thing. She didn't put an initial there or date this right thing. No, it wasn't even that. It was that the type of form was out of date. They had a new form on their website, and this form was dated 2024, and the last form that we were using was 2023. There wasn't any issue. All that was different was that there was a little bit more writing, and then there were more pages. That was about all. But the entire thing was rejected again. So I had to get on the line with this poor patient with their swollen, cancer-ridden eye and ask them to come back in to submit it once more and submit on their approved documentation, the one that was within that year. And that to me is a great example, one more story of how feeling like an adult, being an adult, and looking at this system, at all of the things that we have to deal with and what's coming up. It might seem on paper that, oh wow, this is so much easier. It's so much easier than the past. We got phones, and if you need to go somewhere, you just order yourself a Lyft or an Uber, right? This is so easy. And in many ways, that's true. That's actually right. It is easier. What's different though is that it just feels like there's this corporate wolf around every corner just waiting for us and saying, oh, you did this wrong. You did that wrong. Oh, you didn't put your initials here. Or, oh, you might have renter's insurance now, but because you didn't have it retroactively for the past, sorry, you're not eligible, right? It just always seems like there's this little loophole, this little problem that's going to sneak up on us as a generation, as a young adult. And that's part of the reason why we feel this sensation of being overwhelmed, this sensation of feeling like we're insecure. And not, when I say insecure, I don't just mean like from a personality standpoint, like we've got anxiety or depression or something. What I mean is we feel like we're insecure with our livelihoods, with our money, with our future, with what we can depend upon, that we can feel, that we can tangibly feel, like we could have a house, like we can have someone that we love, like those things won't just disappear on us tomorrow because we decided we weren't going to put our initials in this one area, or we just totally forgot it, we didn't see it, it was tucked in small print. All of this coupled with one more thing that Jean Twenge talks about in her writing. She talks about the slow life strategy, something I've talked about in other videos too. And how this applies here is that as a generation, so many of our milestones that might have given us confidence, that might have made us feel more secure as people, we didn't have a lot of those challenges, those milestones until later in life. So while people of past generations were going out and getting their licenses immediately, they were illegally, right? Something that they probably shouldn't have done, but they were out drinking and partying with their friends. We didn't have so many of those interactions. The ages of us drinking and having those first experiences has gone steadily up over time. And so without those, we again have this sensation of feeling unprepared. That we're unprepared for the future, unprepared for what life might bring us, unprepared for what might randomly spring on us around the corner, that our jobs might change, or that we're laid off because of AI. And technology is another great point, because on top of that, so much has changed with technology. There are so many more opportunities now, but also so many changes, making us feel, once again, unsteady. This even happens in relationships too. In her book iGen, she talks about how some of Gen Z are afraid to catch feelings, and we're more likely to have things like situationships and friends with benefits. And I think a big part of why this is the case, because when you look at surveys, a lot of the surveys still tend to say the same thing, that as a generation we want to have a family, that we want to have a long-term relationship, and yet how does that square with more situationships? How does that square with more friends with benefits? Well, to me, it's this feeling of not being ready. I'm not ready for a long-term relationship. I'm not ready to have a family. I'm not ready for these things. And that's the feeling, the cultural feeling that I think so many of us are dealing with, this feeling of not being ready. On top of this, there's been this really well-reported rise in internalizing disorders like anxiety and depression. that I've talked about a lot on this channel, and a lot of people talk about Generation Z mention as well. And so, along with this feeling of being unprepared, is this background anxiety. But then, further, how does his story in particular, and we know who the he is that we're talking about, how does his story influence this? How does that story mirror what we're talking about? Well, along with this comes how he was dealing with spondylolisthesis, I believe it is, and I could be getting the pronunciation wrong, but it's this severe neurological problem with his back, which forced him to have to deal with the medical system. And this is all from a cursory. This is all from a cursory Google search. So, because I'm not trying to go deep here, I want to see how on the surface Gen Z could be so on board, that we could be so supportive. So that is just all on the surface. You can see just in that little blurb, that one sentence, you can see how that would end up with you dealing with the medical system, with you having to struggle back and forth with that. But furthermore, he then dropped off the map for a while, and that I think echoes a lot of those kind of YouTube rabbit holes, those dark moments that we have where we do the monk mode that has become such a meme, but talks about and highlights a certain underlying truth that a lot of times with our generation, when we're dealing with something, we go inside of ourselves, that we become recluses, that we become more and more isolated. And he was dealing with that as well. But furthermore, that neurological problem affected his dating life, making it so that way he was unable to perform in the bedroom. And that, to me, is one more echo of some things that we feel like we're dealing with, this kind of background anxiety that we won't quite measure up, and that we won't be able to have those relationships we want to have. It's like this magnified version of so many of the fears that we have as a generation, of so many of the trouble that we think or we wonder if we might have to deal with. Then on top of this, I want to talk about something a little bit different, but we'll understand why it's so important. And that is the concept of attractiveness and the halo effect. This is something that Daniel Kahneman and Tversky has talked about in their work in behavioral economics, but also in Daniel Kahneman's book Thinking Fast and Slow. He talks about how the halo effect is when someone who's quite attractive is assumed to be good on many other things, is assumed to be more reasonable, smarter. Just you name the thing, they tend to be seen as more of these positive traits. Now, more than this, and although this is true of him for sure, and a big part of the appeal, one more thing though along with this is that one aspect of attractiveness, it's very important actually, is called averageness. Now, when you look this up and do research on this concept, you'll find that people with more average faces, or faces that tend to resemble the most amount of people in that ethnic group. So if you have a black guy who looks a lot like other black guys, they tend to be seen a lot more attractively as someone who has very unique features. People with very unique features usually tend to be seen as people who are ugly or unattractive. But the more average your face is, and I don't mean average in that like, oh, he's a 5 out of 10. No, I mean average in that they look the most like all of the rest of the people of that ethnic group. So I think another good example is Tom Holland. They actually did this research. I'm pretty sure they did some studies on his face, and they saw that he was a great example of this phenomenon, that his face tends to resemble a lot of young white guys. And that's part of the reason why people consider him to be quite attractive. So why is that an important point? Because if someone's really attractive, a big part of it is going to be the averageness. But more than just that averageness also stands for something bigger. It stands for, like we were talking about earlier, his story. And we know who the he we're talking about is. His story really tends to look like a magnified version of what we're all dealing with. Like that averageness has made us identify with a lot of the same struggles. And again, I'm not defending anything that was done. I'm trying to understand why that happened to our generation. And that averageness really made us more likely to see ourselves in those experiences, to see ourselves in that same fundamental issue. And what is that? Well, that is at the core of so much of who we are as Gen Z, is this fundamental fear. This fear that we will not be secure enough, that we will not be foundationally ready or good enough for the future. This insecurity that we won't have enough money for whatever happens next, that we won't have enough knowledge, resources, that we won't have the relationship that we want, that we are just not going to be able to have something firm, foundational, and secure. And he represents that in so many ways. He represents how someone who could be doing the right thing, get a master's degree in computer engineering, I believe it was, who can go to college to become valedictorian, come from a really good family, could still go down the same hole, could still have the same issues, could still have some random thing happen to them, and that totally changed them for the worse, totally impact their life in a terrible way. And then moreover, we then are likely to see how that could lead to so much frustration you could act out in a negative way. Now, again, we're understanding how that could be the case, but I am not in no way justifying it. But we might look at that and we can see ourselves in how that could happen to us. How we might be able to go down a dark road. How we could end up doing something that we might regret because of similar difficulties, because of similar fundamental fears. And while none of that is okay, that I think that is a big part of the reason why so much of Gen Z has seen themselves in this news story, has seen themselves in this event. So that was a look into how Generation Z has personally struggled with some core fears, some core issues, and why that led us down the road, at least some of us, to supporting the person we're talking about here. So in the next video, we're going to talk about from a more artistic, narrative, cultural standpoint, why was this so appealing? So thanks for looking into it. I'll see you in the next one.